Theraichi Itoron My husband's, 33, phone suddenly blew up with texts and calls from unknown numbers. How I discovered the 2-year affair he'd been hiding. Throwaway for obvious reasons. Friends know my main account. I met James 8 years ago at a mutual friend's wedding, where he was a groomsman and I was a bridesmaid. The classic setup, I know. We clicked instantly. He was charming, ambitious, and made me laugh until my face hurt. We dated for 3 years before getting married, and we now have a 3-year-old daughter, Lily. Until recently, I would have described our marriage as solid and loving, despite the usual stresses of balancing careers and parenthood. James works in business development for a software company with offices across the country. His job involves substantial travel, typically 2 to 3 days every other week, to meet clients and coordinate with teams in other locations. I work as a school counselor, which allows me more consistent hours for Lily's childcare. We've always made our arrangement work through careful planning, video calls during his trips, and quality time when he's home. We had our challenges like any couple, but communication was always our strength. At least, that's what I thought. The first subtle change I noticed was about 6 months ago. James had always been attentive to his phone. His job required accessibility, but suddenly there was a new intensity to his phone habits. He began taking calls in another room or stepping outside for work calls. His phone would ding with text notifications, and he'd glance at it with an unreadable expression before silencing it or turning it face down. At first, I didn't think much of it. His company was preparing for a major product launch, and everyone was under pressure. When I asked about the increased calls, he explained they were coordinating across different time zones, which made sense. "Sorry about all the interruptions," he'd say. "This launch is brutal. It'll calm down soon." But it didn't calm down. If anything, the mysterious calls and texts increased. I started noticing numbers with area codes from cities where his company had offices: Seattle, Austin, Denver. They would call at odd hours, early mornings, late evenings, weekends. James always stepped away to answer, his voice too low for me to hear the conversations. About 4 months ago, the real red flags began appearing. James set a password on his phone, something he'd never done before. When I asked about it casually, he claimed it was a new company security policy. His explanation sounded reasonable, but something in his delivery felt rehearsed. Then came the changes in his travel patterns. Trips that used to be 2 days started extending to 3 or 4. He began taking more weekend trips, which had previously been rare. There were last-minute emergency client meetings that couldn't be rescheduled. The clincher was the unknown or no-caller ID calls. They started trickling in, then became a regular occurrence. James would see these calls, excuse himself, and sometimes be gone for 30-40 minutes. When he returned and I asked who it was, the answer was always vague, just work, or a client with an issue. One evening, while James was in the shower, his phone lit up with a text from an unsaved number. I didn't mean to look, but it was right there on the coffee table, and the preview caught my eye. "Miss you already. Last night was amazing." My heart dropped. I picked up the phone, but couldn't access it with the password. When James came out of the shower and saw me holding his phone with what must have been a stricken expression, he immediately became defensive. "Why are you going through my phone?" he demanded. "I wasn't," I said. "A text just came in, and I happened to see the preview. Who is texting you that they miss you already and that last night was amazing?" He snatched the phone, glanced at it, and his expression shifted from anger to calculated calm. "It's nothing. Just Dan being dramatic about closing that Denver account yesterday. You know how sales guys talk." It wasn't a satisfying explanation, but without evidence, I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt. Still, the seed of suspicion had been planted. The definitive moment of discovery came unexpectedly through our shared cellular account. James and I were on a family plan, and I handled most of the bill payments. One evening while paying bills, I logged into our account to verify a recent charge. That's when I noticed something odd in the call and text logs. There were dozens, no hundreds of texts and calls to and from numbers in Seattle, far more than any other location. James traveled to Seattle regularly, but the volume seemed excessive for pure business. One number in particular appeared hundreds of times, with calls often lasting 30-plus minutes, many occurring late at night or early in the morning. This same number also exchanged an enormous number of texts with James, including on days when he was supposedly busy with all-day meetings. My hands shaking, I downloaded our last 6 months of detailed call logs. The pattern was undeniable. The Seattle calls had started about 2 years ago, infrequently at first, then steadily increasing to near-daily contact. Some calls occurred while James was supposedly putting Lily to bed, during walks to clear his head, or even while I was asleep beside him. I didn't confront him immediately. Instead, I did something I never thought I'd do. I installed a call recording app on our landline, which we rarely used except for calls with elderly relatives. Then I called the Seattle number from our house phone. A woman answered on the third ring. "Hello." I hung up without speaking, my suspicions confirmed. It was definitely not Dan from sales. I searched the number online and eventually connected it to a woman named Melissa who worked in James's company's Seattle office. Her LinkedIn profile showed she joined the company about 2 years ago, right when the calls began. Her position was in the same department as James, though at a different level. Further digging revealed her Instagram, which was mostly private, but showed recent photos and locations that matched James's business trips: a distinctive hotel lobby in Chicago, a beachfront restaurant in San Diego, a hiking trail near Denver. The coincidences were too numerous to ignore. The final confirmation came when I found a charge on our credit card statement for a jewelry store in Seattle during James's last trip there. He hadn't given me any jewelry recently. The physical evidence was overwhelming, but the emotional realization was devastating. My husband of 5 years, the father of our child, had been living a double life for nearly 2 years, almost our daughter's entire lifetime. I waited until Lily was at my parents' house for her regular weekend visit before confronting James. I had prepared what I wanted to say, gathered my evidence, and steeled myself for denials and gaslighting. That Friday evening, I placed the call logs, credit card statements, and screenshots of Melissa's Instagram posts on the kitchen table. When James came home, I simply said, "I know about Melissa in Seattle." His face went through a series of expressions: shock, anger, calculation, and finally, defeat. He sank into a chair across from me. "How did you find out?" he asked, which was telling in itself, not a denial, but disappointment at being caught. "Your unknown numbers aren't actually unknown to our cell phone provider," I said, pushing the call logs toward him. "Do you want to explain why you've been calling and texting this Seattle number hundreds of times, including at 1 a.m. when you're supposedly asleep next to me?" What followed was a conversation that rewrote the history of our marriage. James admitted to meeting Melissa 2 years ago during a company training event. What began as professional mentorship, he was senior to her, evolved into lunches, then drinks, then an affair that had been ongoing since. Their relationship had intensified in the past 6 months, hence the increased calls and texts. "I never meant for it to happen," he said, using the cliche I'd read about but never expected to hear from my husband's mouth. "It just developed." When I asked if he loved her, His hesitation was answer enough before he admitted, "I have feelings for her, yes." The most painful moment came when I asked about the future he'd envisioned. Had he been planning to leave me? To continue the double life indefinitely? "I don't know," he said, which was perhaps the most honest and most devastating answer. "I've been living day to day, trying not to think too far ahead." In other words, he had been willing to exist in a state of perpetual deception, stealing time and emotional energy from our family to maintain his relationship with Melissa, with no real plan for resolution. "Does she know about me and Lily?" I asked. "She knows I'm married with a child," he admitted, "but I told her things between us had been bad for years." Another lie, not just to me, but about me, to justify his behavior. When I showed him the jewelry store charge, he confessed to buying Melissa a necklace for her birthday. When I pointed out he'd forgotten my birthday entirely this year, claiming to be swamped with the product launch, he had no response. That night, James packed a bag and went to stay at a hotel. I spent hours sitting in Lily's room, looking at her stuffed animals and picture books, trying to imagine how to explain to a 3-year-old why Daddy wouldn't be home every day anymore. The following weeks were a blur of practical matters and emotional turmoil. I consulted a lawyer to understand my options. I started therapy to process the trauma. I told my parents and closest friends what had happened, building the support network I would need. James's initial reaction was a mixture of relief at no longer living a double life and panic at the consequences. He claimed he wanted to fix things and save our marriage, but his actions told a different story. He continued communicating with Melissa while telling me he was trying to end things cleanly. He suggested couples counseling while still taking secretive calls in his car. 3 weeks after D-Day, I discovered he was still seeing her during supposed work trips. This was the final straw. I told him I was filing for divorce and asked him to communicate with me only regarding Lily and legal matters. The most surprising aftermath came when Melissa contacted me directly. She sent a long email claiming she'd believed James was in a loveless marriage and had been planning to leave for over a year. She attached screenshots of their conversations where he disparaged me, complained about our relationship, and promised a future together. Reading his words, lies about our marriage, criticisms of me as a partner, was like experiencing the betrayal all over again. But it also provided clarity. This wasn't a momentary lapse or a purely physical affair. It was a calculated deception maintained through hundreds of deliberate choices over years. When confronted with these messages, James claimed he had said those things in the heat of the moment, or to keep the peace with Melissa. His inability to take full responsibility only confirmed I was making the right decision in ending our marriage. It's been 5 months since D-Day. The divorce proceedings are underway, and we've established a co-parenting arrangement where James sees Lily 3 days a week. I've kept our family home, which provides stability for our daughter. As for Melissa and James, their relationship imploded about 2 months after everything came to light. According to mutual friends, once the secrecy and forbidden nature of their relationship disappeared, so did much of its appeal. James has since expressed regret and a desire to reconcile, but that bridge was burned beyond repair by his continued deception, even after being caught. The hardest part has been rebuilding my sense of reality. For 2 years, I had been living in a fiction constructed by someone I trusted completely. Every "I love you," every family moment, every conversation about our future, all of it was happening alongside his other relationship. Therapy has been essential in processing this trauma. I've learned that his choices reflect his character, not my worth. I've discovered strength I didn't know I had, and I've rebuilt connections with friends I had inadvertently neglected while trying to maintain our perfect family life. Lily is adapting better than I feared. though she still has questions and difficult moments. Children are remarkably resilient, but they also deserve honesty appropriate to their age. We've worked with a child psychologist to find the right words to explain the changes in our family structure. Lessons learned. Through therapy and painful reflection, I've gained insights that might help others facing similar situations. 1. Trust your instincts about unusual phone behavior. The sudden increase in unknown calls and texts, the password protection, the secretive conversations, these were all warning signs I initially rationalized away. 2. Digital footprints are hard to erase completely. Cell phone records, credit card statements, location data, and social media can reveal patterns even when someone is careful about covering their tracks. 3. The length of an affair affects the recovery process. This wasn't a one-time mistake, but years of sustained deception, which makes reconciliation much more difficult to consider. 4. Children perceive more than we think. Even at 3, Lily sensed the tension and changes in our household, reacting with behavioral changes of her own. 5. Support systems are crucial. The friends and family who stepped up with practical help, emotional support, and childcare made an impossible situation manageable. For those in the midst of discovering infidelity, know that the overwhelming pain does eventually become less acute. The future may look different than you planned, but it can still be beautiful and fulfilling. You deserve honesty, respect, and a partner who chooses you every day, not just when it's convenient or when there are no other options. TLDR, husband's phone suddenly filled with calls and texts from unknown numbers. Discovered through phone records he'd been having a 2-year affair with a colleague, currently divorcing and rebuilding life with my daughter.